Welcome to this online course, Introduction to University Social Responsibility. I am Robert Hollister, Professor Emeritus at Tufts University and Senior Advisor to the University Social Responsibility Network. University civic engagement and social responsibility has been the focus of my entire academic career. First 10 years at MIT and then 30 years plus at Tufts University. I'm very pleased to have this opportunity to share my own experience and that of other universities who are distinguished in their leadership and social responsibility. Our 4-session course has the following goals. First, to increase the knowledge and capabilities of colleagues about university social responsibility. A second major purpose is to disseminate information about effective practices and strategies, with an emphasis on effective strategies in a broad diversity of contexts. A third aim is to contribute to continuing growth of this expanding global movement. And fourth, to foster and elevate international exchange and collaboration of people who are already active leaders in this field and to those of you who are taking this course. So, first off, our opening exploration, session 1. We're going to do 3 things. First is to explore what is university social responsibility. Second, why is it important? And then third, some preliminary recommendations of effective strategies. These strategies, these approaches that have been proven to work well in diverse settings around the world are ones that we will highlight in a preliminary way today in this first session. And in the concluding session, we will talk in greater detail about the most effective strategies for either creating new social responsibility programs in your institution or for strengthening and adapting those that have already started. To talk sensibly about university social responsibility and the approaches that may be most effective in your institution, we need to start by clarifying what we mean by this topic, this headline phrase, or university social responsibility. The overall meaning is the full range of university efforts to maximize the positive social impacts of their programs and their policies. And to do that with a particular focus on the core functions of institutions of higher education, which of course are teaching and research. University social responsibility also means for the organization to consistently ask, how can we conduct our central activities so as to increase those positive social impacts? But then if you talk with colleagues around the world, or you look at the materials and the descriptions of their work on this subject area, they use various words and phrases to describe those activities. They use many words which are quite different from university social responsibility. Let's look at this quick sample of a few of them. People around the world use a broad variety of words and phrases to describe their work on this topic. Here are just a few examples: community service, volunteering, civic education, universities giving back, human rights and development. Do you see in that list phrases similar to what fits in the culture and in the programs of your own institution? You may very well have other phrases and concepts that are important as well. But my purpose in sharing this broad sample of the vocabulary is to be clear that what we're talking about and seeking to understand and to do better is a common core of functions and activities, but they're ones that in different contexts march under different banners, are described under different headlines. And it's very important. There's no reason to depart from that. The phraseology that works in South Africa is going to be different in some respects from what works in Argentina. However, what we find, and what is actually a fascinating and hugely positive dimension of this work in higher education, is that across the differences of geography, of type of institution, of political context, there's a huge amount of common vision, and more often than not, the same basic strategies really work well in those very different settings. So we don't want to be distracted by the different words used in Latin America and Africa and Asia and Europe. But we also, it's very important to push ourselves to be clear about the exact nature of the activities that we're doing and that we're seeking to do better. So then, with this basic idea in mind that the labels vary, but accompanying that, they actually do represent a great deal of common purpose and common activity. So then let's consider next the specific types of programs. Here are the major ones that define the primary dimensions of university social responsibility. And the salad, the mixed, the rich tossed salad of phrases that we looked at just a few moments ago all apply in different ways to one or another of these handful of central functions and activities. First, volunteering and voluntary action. Second, service learning, the integration of service activities in the academic curriculum. Third, applied research or engaged research. Next, university-community partnerships. Fifth, institutional policies and practices. And then finally, response to natural and human-caused disasters. Let's look a little bit more at each of those primary types of activities and functions. First of all, volunteering. This is basically a universal dimension of university social responsibility. In almost all institutions of higher education around the world, there has been in the past 10 and 20 years just massive growth in the volume and in the variety of initiatives through which students address the problems of the communities in which their institutions are located. Very often, these programs, while they may benefit from support and supervision by administrators, a huge proportion of them are organized and run by students themselves. They range from environmental cleanup projects to programs to educate younger children, initiatives to strengthen social services to older people. What are some examples that pop to mind at your own institution? Next, service learning. And this is a particularly important piece of our overall topic because it builds on volunteering, but it moves toward far greater impacts on students' education and development, and for the most part, greater and more lasting impacts on communities and society. When institutions start to integrate service projects in their academic courses, it has, as I said, far more reach in terms of the students who participate, and often greater impact on the student participants. In effect, what service learning does is to connect experiential education, learning by doing, with classroom teaching. So, for example, students who are taking a course on housing policy and are concerned with how to address the problem of homelessness in a major metropolitan area. If they volunteer at shelters for the homeless, they cannot help but learn a tremendous amount about themselves, about who is homeless and why. But they're going to learn more if that experience is accompanied with the opportunity to really learn in depth about how housing markets and government policies create this very painful social problem, and they're in volunteer work is enriched by their texts and classroom experience, and vice versa. And in my experience, and what I hear from colleagues on all continents, is that a particular aspect of service learning that holds huge promise is that it reaches students who do not, of their own volition, sign up for a volunteer service project. But they take a course in which experiential learning, service project, is incorporated, and thereby, over time, the institution reaches and engages a much higher proportion of the student body. So the expansion that we're witnessing of, in many parts, the dramatic growth in service learning is perhaps the most important trend and opportunity, and it's one that by definition involves the work not only of students, but of their teachers as well. A wonderful example in the service learning area that we'll be looking at in more detail in a subsequent session is the large service learning program of Hong Kong Polytechnic University. Several years ago, when Hong Kong PolyU was planning the celebration of their 75th anniversary as an institution, they decided that one of the ways in which they would mark that anniversary was to create a new graduation requirement. And it was quite a dramatic step. They decided that there would be, going forward, a new graduation requirement. Didn't matter whether you were majoring in chemical engineering or design or literature. In order to get your bachelor's degree, all students would have to take at least one community service learning course. It was an astonishing, and this is a large institution, 30, 40,000 students. So no small effort involved in implementing that requirement, in providing the organizational infrastructure and the staff support to do it well in all fields of study. So then Hong Kong PolyU created an office of service learning to organize and to support professors to raise up and expand dramatically the number of service learning courses throughout the university. A third major type of social responsibility work of universities is engaged research. What's that? What do we mean engaged research? What that refers to is research conducted in various forms of partnership with external organizations, with community partners, with local and national government agencies and businesses, but a real collaboration in both the planning of the research and in the conduct of the research as well. An example that we'll look at in more detail is from Manchester University, which has had a long-term research project on the experience of older residents of that city, engaging teams of older people in studying the experience and the problems encountered by older citizens, in evaluating public policies, and in developing new ideas and new approaches to making the greater Manchester area a more elderly-friendly city. And it's a very exciting effort. Literally, the professors who run the program organized and trained teams of older residents to help frame the research questions and then to gather the information and to analyze it. And the experience is that the research not only had impressive positive social benefits in terms of its overall intention to improve the lives of older citizens of Manchester, but also enhanced the quality of the research itself, because it looked at questions that would not have been posed, would not have been without the participation of senior citizens at that stage in the research effort. And the data that was collected they had greater access to information and greater positive cooperation from the people whose insights they were tapping, because the subjects of the research were involved in such an extensive way. University-community partnerships are an essential ingredient of successful university social responsibility. They also are a valuable and highly important element in and of themselves, as well as being a facilitating infrastructure for engaged teaching and engaged research. By university-community partnerships, we mean effective long-term working relationships between universities and the organizations with which their students and professors are working. An example that we'll be examining later, and one that's impressive in its scale and quality, is the University of Pretoria, and that institution's rich and broad network of close working ties with non-governmental organizations in poor communities. The community organizations in that region and the university personnel, professional staff, students, and professors from Pretoria University, in effect, help each other perform their respective missions. They are increasing the staff capabilities, both for educational experience, but also for the service work that the non-governmental organizations are performing. And that if you look in almost any part of the world at social responsibility programs of universities, there are a few exceptions, but for the most part, the strongest programs in terms of their impacts and their scale and how they're regarded by different stakeholders inside and outside the university, the strongest programs tend to be ones that have invested heavily in university community partnerships. They put staff into the organization and maintaining of those working relationships. They also have developed and they maintain ways to involve community partners in the planning of university programs and giving those partners the respect and the influence of some form of real accountability with respect to the university-based work. university policies and practices are growing in their importance with respect to university social responsibility. But the proportion of institutions of higher education that are taking full initiative in this regard is still much smaller than the types of social responsibility functions and activities that we've talked about in this section of today's discussion. And by institutional policies and practices, what I mean are really the corporate practices of the institution. Normally, and quite naturally, when we think of the opportunities for universities to strengthen their social responsibility, we think immediately of and really concentrate on educational programs and on research activities. But of course, universities are major employers. They have, many of them, substantial physical facilities. They spend substantial amounts of money locally and more broadly. So there's a growing movement to include that whole realm of decision-making and of practice under the rubric of university social responsibility. In the United States, there's a very active and successful coalition called the Anchor Institutions Task Force. And the whole purpose of that alliance, in which several dozen universities are very active, is to collaborate and exchange about this dimension of university social responsibility. And the examples, the strategies include how those institutions are being intentional and more comprehensive and strategic with respect to how they're tapping the full array of their resources, not only how they teach and how they do research, but how their purchase of goods and services, their employment practices, the extent to which they make their physical facilities available to broader groups. Because in many communities, the scale of the university makes them a hugely important player in local community economic development. And they have the opportunity to do that without regard to the locality, or if they choose to be intentional and strategic about it, can achieve far greater impacts and do that in a way that is very powerfully reinforcing of the other dimensions that we've been talking about: volunteering, service learning, engaged research, and community partnerships. Response to natural and human-caused disasters incorporates elements of volunteering and service learning and research, but I think it's appropriate to give it the status of a clear, separate type of university social responsibility work, because it's so universal in the needs and opportunities. As universities devote their person power and their expertise when earthquakes strike, when floods afflict a society, And of necessity, universities step forward, providing shelter to displaced population, providing much needed health services. And it's very impressive to observe how a growing number of universities, a major dramatic example is Kyoto University, is also then active in the policy development side. How can societies do a better job of predicting, anticipating, preventing disasters, and then also organizing for the inevitability of those human-caused and natural disasters. And it's striking to see how much opportunity there is for exchange of best practices and collaboration around this topic by universities in Asia, in Africa, in Latin America, really in all parts of the world. So let's step back for a moment and just reflect on these 6 main types of urban social responsibility activities and functions. It's a broad range. They overlap considerably, but they have some discrete individual reality as well. And in laying these out in our kind of preliminary map, I want to be clear that there is no ideal combination of these elements. What is going to work best for any individual institution depends entirely on local realities and context. No single institution is going to be able to invent and sustain perfect top-of-the-line work in all of these areas. The right mix of university social responsibility functions does, and it should, change over time. So the ideal, as you consider what are your best opportunities for strengthening the work of your own institution, is to both embrace universal best practices, but then to shape your social responsibility work according to local context, local challenges, and opportunities. And the good news, in fact, it's excellent news, is that you don't have to design these efforts from scratch. What makes this area of endeavor so promising for universities today is that we now have in place and can learn from and import and adapt the experience of mature programs that are already doing it well. And indeed, this online course is one vehicle for helping that process of dissemination and exchange happen more extensively. I think it's worth reflecting a bit on the question of why is university social responsibility important? I obviously think it's important. I've spent my career focusing on it. But it's important not to take for granted and being clear about the possible reasons for significance can feed into doing a sharper job of clarifying goals and purposes, and also of working successfully with the broad mix of stakeholders who support for this dimension of higher education is required in order for it to be successful. It's not enough to say to a government official or a foundation representative or a journalist or a business woman whose support is needed, help us with this university social responsibility program because our intentions are good, because it's an example of just a positive, well-intentioned activity. But as I said earlier, in the fast-moving changes that are affecting the higher education sector, this is an especially important topic because it indeed is generating very impressive benefits and impacts, and the future potential in that regard is several-fold what it can be, what it is today. So here are the perspectives of several distinguished leaders in various roles whom we've asked to comment their views of what they're trying to do, what they care about, and why why is university social responsibility important. First, the current president of Harvard University, Lawrence Bacow. You wouldn't automatically assume that one of the top research universities in the world would also be putting a stake in the ground and declaring a high institutional priority for university social responsibility. But they have. And President Bacow is very clear, as you see here in the quote that he has shared. We are committed to educating students in all fields of study to be active, effective citizens. This is a key part of our mission. And it impressed the institution immensely when President Bacow, in his inaugural address, declared that one of his new initiatives would be to raise funds for all undergraduates to be supported to do a summer public service internship. Another major leader in this field internationally is Cheryl de la Rey, currently serving as Vice Chancellor of Canterbury University in New Zealand. She previously was Vice Chancellor of Pretoria University, which is a important partner in this course. As you see here, Professor de la Rey says, our experience is that strengthening community-engaged teaching and research results in higher quality teaching and research. The service rendered is important, but in her and her colleagues' experience, community-engaged teaching and research is a pathway to higher academic quality. These distinguished leaders from diverse sectors have advocated for university social responsibility as a clear and effective path to achieving very important benefits and impacts: improved educational outcomes, enhanced research, strengthened community relations, elevated morale and productivity of major stakeholders. Let's first talk a little bit about the educational results that are such an important outcome of this work. We have now quite a lot of evidence that students' participation in the variety of social responsibility programs, volunteering, and particularly service learning courses, produces leadership values and skills, creativity, problem solving, enhanced skills at organizing people and resources, project management, communication skills. And if you look at this bundle, this combination, they're sometimes referred to as soft skills. And what's particularly important to realize is that these soft skills are exactly the ones that employers are seeking and often have difficulty finding. Indeed, in many countries, employers are critical of institutions of higher education for failing to produce a sufficient flow of graduates who excel in these skills. But then there's also a second incredibly important kind of educational outcome, and that is greater learning of the disciplinary subject matter, whether the course is in economics or literature or sociology. In my home institution, Tufts University, an early faculty champion of our civic engagement and social responsibility work was Professor Chris Swan, professor of civil and environmental engineering. He's a specialist in soil. So he teaches each year a course on soil contamination, highly technical course. Several years ago, he added to that course a new field assignment. He converted the course into a service learning approach, where he assigned teams of students to go to a nearby low-income community where there were, in many parts of the neighborhood, severe soil contamination. And their assignment was to measure pollution in the ground and then to recommend cleanup approaches, and then to present their findings and their recommendations to a local community organization. The immediate result that this professor experienced was that the students learned the core technical material more quickly and better than they previously had. Because they have an opportunity to apply the concepts and methods learning in the classroom, and they were able to see and feel the value of their work to their community group client. And they had as a result of this assignment, some initial experience in the way in which their technical prowess and the dynamics of communication with a client group from very different backgrounds was both an interesting thing and was an aspect that would increase their professional capabilities. Another area of benefit that I want to emphasize is the ways in which engaged research can improve the research itself. The demonstrated social value of engaged research creates an additional rationale, builds greater willingness by both public and private sources of funding to invest in the research activity. And then on some research topics, the engaged approach to research, that is, doing research in partnership with community organizations in both the planning and framing and in the conduct of the research activity, redounds to greater access to data. Improved community relations is one more benefit and impact that I would encourage you to pay attention to, encourage you to pay attention to in your home environments. In many universities, there is a constant problem of conflicts between the universities and their surrounding areas. Tensions around land use, around the spillover effects of student behavior and the like. University social responsibility presents and creates experience in the surrounding area of the institution as a good neighbor rather than a bad neighbor. It creates a perception over time on the part of external groups of the university as a source of assistance and collaboration rather than a source of problems. And then, of course, there's an additional positive community relations benefit well beyond the immediate surround of the physical plant of the university, which is enhanced public support for the university on the part of groups that directly and indirectly determine levels of financial support and also make decisions about the ways in which universities are regulated by government agencies. When you think about it, it's an obvious point that to the extent that legislators, government officials, other people in decision-making roles that influence the institutions of higher education, to the extent that those individuals and groups see the university as a source of broad public benefit and broad public positive impacts, that almost automatically translates into greater support in multiple forms. So we've talked about what this phenomenon is. What does university social responsibility consist of? And we've talked about the significance of this growing phenomenon. It's important also to understand why these activities are happening, and in particularly why they are expanding in all parts of the world. Because knowing more about the causes can help you to think and act strategically about future opportunities in planning in your own institution. The overall situation is that this dramatic expansion is the result of several factors that are converging and that reinforce one another. A first very important factor is growing student demand. Now, students, of course, choose where to study for a variety of reasons. And they clearly do not present themselves saying, I am here to study at Kyoto University because of your excellent programs in social responsibility. but their actual motivation and their decision process increasingly does include exactly that. Whether they're prospective students at the University of New South Wales in Australia or at the University of Pretoria. Students increasingly are seeking places where they can get an excellent education and also an excellent training in their chosen field, but they're also looking for a university experience that will help them to develop those soft skills for which employers are seeking qualified graduates, and their own activism, their own idealism to improve the world. They are seeking opportunities as part of their university education to make a difference, to apply what they are learning. A second key factor is the needs and the expectations of the broader society. In the increasingly outdated, older ivory tower model, there was a desire by the personnel of the university to be separate from society, and to a certain extent, the constituencies outside of the walls, outside of the ivory tower, celebrated and accommodated that model. But what we're increasingly seeing in many different countries, in situations where almost always it's the case that public funds are scarce, increasingly government agencies, NGOs, private businesses as well, have realized that universities and the university resources have the potential to make more direct contributions to priority needs in those communities and in those societies. And so a big piece of what is driving this movement is increasingly forceful and clear expectation and demand from those groups outside of the university. Government policies and programs in many circumstances play a specific and very influential role. This is not the case in all countries, but in several, it's dramatically true. Let me give you just a couple of examples. Decades ago, the national government in Mexico instituted a requirement that all students in institutions of higher education, in order to receive their bachelor's degree, had to demonstrate that they had performed a minimum of 240 hours of social service. Now, the impact of that on the universities, on the country, is huge. Even though a fair number of students figure out a way of meeting the requirement in a way that is not particularly in tune with the actual expectations. For many of them, it's a serious endeavor, and all of the universities have developed sources of support and guidance in order to enable and challenge the students to have that, to meet the requirement in a way that is educationally productive. Another example would be in Israel, where the education ministry has established programs of funding for curriculum development and for engaged research that are important resources for universities across the country to gain financial support for their engaged teaching and engaged research. Institutional self-interest is another factor that overlaps the ones that I've mentioned and will speak to in a moment. The opportunity for universities to achieve the benefits that we've been discussing is a big motivator, not surprising. And increasingly, universities realize that in addition to being ways to enhance teaching and research, that their social responsibility programs can help them to accomplish other core priorities, to recruit students, to recruit and retain faculty, to garner positive public attention, to enhance their fundraising, for example. Furthermore, we see in many instances that related social and political movements play a major role in driving this trend. Think of them as related and intersecting movements. For example, movements that have to do with promoting environment and sustainability or combating climate change. Students and professors who in their voluntary action and in their service learning and their engaged research are doing that kind of work, are doing it with the understanding and with the motivation that it's all about the environment and all about climate change. But indeed, at a functional level and in terms of the kinds of activities and types of functions and programs that we're discussing in the course, it's simultaneously equally about university social responsibility. We've mentioned the impact of global rankings of universities. And for the most part, until recently, those ranking systems have been a major obstacle to university social responsibility, precisely because they focus on and they reward other aspects of university work, in particular, research reputation and research productivity. In my work as the director of a global coalition of universities on their civic engagement and social responsibility, whenever I would sit with the vice chancellor or president or rector of one of our member institutions and talk about what should be the priorities of our coalition, they would invariably complain about the rankings. And even as they were spending huge amounts of energy figuring out how can I help my institution move from 24th to 21st on a particular ranking regime, they were also distressed and wished that it were different, that there could be a change that would enable the rankings to reward and credit excellence in social responsibility. So that remains a challenge, but it's very good news that now one of the ranking systems has established a social responsibility oriented system. This is the Times Higher Education UN the UN Sustainable Development Goals achievements of universities, and the regime that concentrates on that particular way of measuring university social responsibility. But one of the things that I hope you will take from this course is the opportunity to continue to support movement in that direction. Finally, particularly in settings of harsh social and political conflict, an additional reason for the advancement of social responsibility programming can be that for the contesting parties, for the conflicting groups, the university can be a valuable neutral place for convening, for conflict resolution, for the negotiation of differences. And increasingly we see settings as the university has opened up its doors, as it has embraced a view of its mission to include a greater emphasis on social responsibility, that convening and conflict resolution function is powerful and is an impetus to support this area of work.